Can everybody hear me? Could you please take your seats? Thank you. Tonight we're going to get the results of the survey. I just want a couple of housekeeping chores. Tonight's presentation is the first time that the Shakespeare Task Force has seen this report. So there will be no public comment tonight. However, in 2 weeks, Tuesday, July 9th, will be strictly dedicated to the public, and you'll have 2 weeks to digest the report. The report will be on the Town of Stratford's website, and tonight we will not get a hard copy. The hard copy will come after, and if there are any revisions that the committee discusses today. Tom?
Thanks, Tony, and good evening, everybody. I just wanted to continue to thank everybody for their participation in this whole process. It's really gone really wonderfully well. I'm going to let Patrick Carlton from MetroCog and Susmitha Atota from the town of Stratford, our town planner, do the presentation. But I just want to make an overall comment that we had a series of public meetings. I know I can recognize many of the faces that participated in those. And they really turned out to be a wonderful format, and that's Susmitha's suggestion was a roundtable format, and that worked out lovely. We really had constructive conversations amongst each other, and I'm really grateful for that. And then there was an online component as well that reflected the exact same questionnaire, and people answered that in large numbers. I'm going to leave the exact numbers to you guys. But in large numbers, people came out and participated in this. Again, the Task Force Commission, its assignment is to summarize what people said. The Task Force objective is not to decide what's going to happen. It's to collect all this thought, present it fairly, present it comprehensively, and make that available to everybody in the process. Tony, I'm going to reiterate what Tony said. We're going to see a presentation tonight. It's the first time the task force has seen this as a whole. Once the presentation is done, I think we've been requested to come back to the town hall, kind of seats back here, so we can all have a period of time to comment and ask questions of Patrick and Susmitha. So we're going to do that tonight, and then there's going to be this July 9th meeting in which everybody's going to have the time to look at the final document and come back for a round of public comment before this whole package is rolled up and forwarded to the mayor as requested. That's the process that's going to happen from here. So we really appreciate everyone's participation. Remind everybody that this is not over. There's time for public comment, and July 9th will be that period of time. So without saying much more than that, I'd like to hand it over to Patrick and Susmitha, and they'll do the rest of the presentation. After they're done, we're going to lower the screen. Task force members that are sitting in the middle here are going to move up to the dais, and then we're going to have time to ask questions of them. Sure. I'm Tom Dillon. I'm the co-chair. Tony Nazzardo is the other co-chair. And I think that's basically it. So I appreciate you coming out to hear this with us, and I look forward to reacting to it as you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Good evening, everyone. As many of you in the audience know by now already, I'm the town planner. I was just recently hired 6 months ago and straight up brought onto this project. And Patrick Carlton here is with MetroCog, who is our consulting planner, who helped put together this great PowerPoint. Mary Dean, my supervisor, and she is the Director of Economic Development, who is leading this effort. Karen Sportini, who is also with Economic Development, who is part of our team in working on this project. So we are the four people who did the legwork for this PowerPoint, and compiling all the responses was MetroCog's job, and summarizing was MetroCog's job. I just want to say one thing before Patrick starts his PowerPoint today. we have been working very hard on this, and I think we would need a day or two to modify the PowerPoint based on the feedback we hear from the task force tonight. And then after we tighten up this PowerPoint, we would circulate it among the task force and also keep it on the website for anybody in the public to access it. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Patrick Carlton. I'm with MetroCog, the planning consultant on the project. I just want to thank you all for coming out this evening and attending the organizational meeting of the Shakespeare Property Task Force. As many of you know, this has been a lengthy process to really dig deep and get as much community input and feedback as we possibly can get. We're not here to make any sort of decisions tonight. We're here to just summarize what all of you said during the 5 community workshops and the online survey. So with that, I'd like to I will advance to the first slide. To give you an overview, the Shakespeare Property Task Force was formed by Mayor Laura Hoydick and established to oversee the planning process. The goals of the task force were to lead a community outreach effort and to provide the town council and the administration with the public input needed to make an informed decision on how to best proceed with the property. As part of the community visioning process, as mentioned, we did a series of community workshops and an online survey. We hosted 5 community workshops. We had an online survey that was accessible via the town's website, through various social media platforms, and through other online methods, and that was available from April 1st to May 3rd of this year. Nearly 700 people offered input via the surveys and the public outreach sessions. We also received numerous written feedback via email. We also received input from various boards and commissions in town about what their feelings towards the planning process and what should be done and how it should be conducted moving forward.
I just want to mention that the Arts Commission needed more time.
So for the community workshops, as mentioned, 5 were held beginning April 1st. The first one was held at the Bird's Eye Municipal Complex. It was open to the general public. Based on sign-in sheets, we had about approximately 85 people to that workshop, but we believe those numbers were actually much higher attended, over 100 people. We believe some people did not utilize the sign-in sheet or forgot to utilize the sign-in sheet. So that was a very good showing, and we gathered a lot of input at that first meeting. The second meeting was held April 10th at the Baldwin Center. It was held in the afternoon and was open to senior citizens. There was extensive outreach via the Baldwin Senior Center and other outreach initiatives to engage the senior population. That was also very well attended, with approximately 75 to 80 people at that meeting. The third meeting was April 23rd, 2019, and it was held at the Connecticut Distributors over on Lordship Boulevard, and it was open to the business and arts community. The business and arts community is very valuable to this process. Obviously, there's a very large local arts community here in town, and we wanted to get their input, and the town made sure that outreach efforts were targeted towards those groups and towards the business community, because they'll also have some buy-in in this process as it continues. And the fourth meeting was held at Booth Memorial Park, also open to the general public. Once again, we had very, very good attendance at that meeting. And the fifth and final meeting was held here on a Friday morning, and was open to Stratford students, those who are heavily involved in the arts programs that the schools offer. As for the survey and electronic communication, the task force encouraged residents who were unable to attend the public workshops to participate in an online survey. As mentioned, the survey was accessible from April 1st to Friday, May 3rd, and any resident was also able to send their public comment via an email that was set up, which was shakespeare@townofstratford.com. So between the survey responses and the the email account, we were able to collect all that information that people provided who were unable to attend the workshops. The town also created a Shakespeare Property Community Visioning page, which listed basically the information I just provided to you, a link to the survey, when the community workshops were going to be, pictures of events, and basically outlined the process and what the next steps would be during the visioning process. As you know, I think most of you are here tonight to really get an understanding of what came out of the community workshops and what came out of the online surveys. I'm going to explain the process that we used, the data analysis process that we used and we conducted the last about a month and a half or so. We asked the community a series of 9 questions at both the community workshops and the online surveys. And those questions were really to just get the ball rolling and the conversation started. They were open-ended questions because we wanted to let the community provide as much feedback as possible. We chose not to use closed-ended questions that had predetermined responses, because we felt we would put the community in basically a box, and we would give answers to questions, and it wouldn't be able to actually really get the thoughts and the opinions of all of you and everyone else who participated. So we wanted to make sure that we kept them open-ended and really gave the townspeople the opportunity to comment about what they want to see with the property moving forward. So with that, data collection was a bit of a challenge. Open-ended questions, like as I mentioned, it's not a yes or no question. It's not a 1, 2, 3 or ABC type of a choice. It's just receiving comments and feedback. And some of those comments were very extensive. Some of the questions had 250 word character limits, so you could that's basically a paragraph. So there was a lot of feedback to sift through, but we were able to do that utilizing what's known as a bucketing analysis. Basically, the bucketing analysis is you review all of the data that you have, you identify general themes and trends, you create categories and subcategories, you focus on the meaning and the context of the responses, and you try your best to classify each response into a general theme or category. So that's the approach we used. And with that, I think we'll enter into question 1. And just so you know, I wanted to give an overview as well about the way we conducted the analysis. When we set up these general themes, you're going to see in a lot of these questions that other makes up a large percentage of the responses. Other does not mean that each response was just, we threw it in another category. There were categories that necessarily had multiple responses, 2 responses, 5 responses, 6 responses, 8 responses, but they didn't make up the largest proportion of themes. What we're going to focus on tonight is the 3 largest themes of each question, because that's where most people put their response and their responses to, or provided their feedback to. So for question 1, what is unique about the town of Stratford, and how can the Shakespeare property strengthen the uniqueness of the town? The community workshop, in the community workshops, we realized that town history was number 1. And town history meant the history of the town itself, but also the history of the theater, the namesake of the theater, and the property itself. The same can be said for the survey responses. History, once again, dominated that response. The location was the number 2 highest response getter in both the community workshop and the survey. And amenities and attractions was number 3. You could see the percentages here broken down. 64 responses for history in community workshops, and 50 responses for history in the survey. 52 responses for location, 47 responses for location in the survey, and 42 responses for amenities in the survey, and another 35 responses for amenities and attractions in the community workshop. So those are the 3 main takeaways for what's unique about Stratford. Its history, its location, and its amenities. Town offers a lot. So we figured in question 2, what is the town missing? We know that it has a lot of history, we know that it has great location, and we know that it has a lot of attractions, a lot of amenities, a lot of community programs, a lot of things for residents to do, and people are very proud of that. So what's missing? For many people, a multi-purpose functional facility is what was missing. A facility that can take on various degrees of entertainment, arts, town events, things like that. Outside of that, many people thought a theater was missing for plays, production, and for Shakespeare. We lumped those all together. For other responses, key responses, open space and recreation was pretty dominant in our survey. And festivals and events was also dominant in the community workshop. Now, as I mentioned previously, I want just to reiterate, you see festivals and events up here under community workshop, but you don't see it under survey. Just because it's not under survey doesn't mean that the survey didn't have people who thought that was an important element. It is. It just did not receive a higher threshold of votes, or not votes, responses. So go into question 3, please. Next slide. Oh. Yep.
This chart, don't go by this. This is a copy paste, and there's an error here. Essentially, this should be open space 16% and other 16%. We're going to go back and fix this. This was like, yes, just so you understand again the connection.
It was a graphical design when we were putting it together, and I apologize. Question 3, another open-ended question that we asked the community. As described in the quitclaim deed, the town shall make reasonable efforts to utilize the premises for public entertainment purposes, including but not limited to continuing its historic uses for theater purposes. In your opinion, what uses that are applicable under the quitclaim deed should the town focus on pursuing? For the community workshop, the top 3 the most common themes were open space, parks and recreation, a theater, a black box, or a venue for plays or productions. That could have meant a stage, an outdoor stage, an indoor theater, something along those lines. And multi-purpose space for arts and entertainment. So not just plays, but music, concerts, other types of arts, fine arts, dance, music. In our survey, we saw that events, festivals, and concert space was the number one opinion that people thought the town should focus on pursuing, followed by a theater, a black box venue, or a venue for plays and productions, followed by open space, parks, and recreation. I think we were going to hold questions to the end, but I'll keep that up to the task force. Question 4, would you like to see a new organization or entity with an institutional structure be formed? How can the town ensure that any new organization or entity is successful in reviving the property? Sorry about that. Community workshop, the most common theme that we were able to lump the responses into was a nonprofit or with a board of directors, a 501c3. That came up about 35 times, or about 21% of the time. Community workshop, people wanted town involvement, oversight, and participation. Doesn't mean that the town should run any sort of program there or should be responsible for any sort of building, but just that the town should be involved in the process moving forward. They shouldn't just put out an RFP strictly to a private developer and be done with it. They want some sort of, it seems like the residents want some sort of oversight, some sort of buy-in, whether a representative on a board of directors or something along those lines. And then number 3 was a professional organization. Find someone who knows what they're doing in terms of certain programming and let them take the reins. For the survey, the number 1 response was professional organization. Number 2 was a community-driven, ground-up, grassroots campaign to have the community decide and be involved, on what happens at the property. And number 3, as mentioned before in the community workshop, this was also evident here in the survey, was some sort of involvement with the town, whether it be, Parks and Rec be involved in some way, shape, or form, or have a representative on if there is a board of directors, to not solely give it up to a private or a nonprofit entity without doing any due diligence or being a part of it in some way, shape, or form. And I just want to comment on that. As most of you know, this property was deeded to the town by the state of Connecticut and is supposed to be used for the community, for the entire community to enjoy. So that's why I think that question shows why people are kind of preferencing some sort of involvement with the town, is because they want to make sure that the property stays in the community's hands. So, question. How do you envision the town or other entity financing any proposed development? So for the community workshop, we received a number of responses. Corporations and private funding received the most responses that we could lump into a category. Fundraising was also another very prominent response, and revenue generation events, such as holding some sort of festival or event, or just making it a facility that maybe if someone wanted to use a nonprofit, they'd have to pay a fee to use so that the town could generate some money in that process. Grants was also a high response rate. As for the survey, in the online survey, we phrased this question a little different. We didn't keep it as open-ended. We gave a selection of choices based just on some of the feedback that we were provided. Grants was number 1, 153 selections. Public-private partnerships was number 2, 113 selections. And nonprofit funding was number 3, 94 selections. Now, multiple people responded to many different, that's why there were so many selections, is because multiple people were allowed to, not use one funding source, but maybe a combination, a mix. Some chose, maybe just grants and nonprofit funding. Some chose all 3. There was actually a 4th one. So it gave the people who took the online survey more of a direction of kind of what funding sources or opportunities are out there. But it seems overwhelming that people want to see more or less a mix of financing going into any proposed use. And I could reiterate what Susmeet is saying is under the community workshop where we kept it open, I think there was about 12 responses where people said no new taxes. There were also people who said, there were some people who said, there should be some local sources utilized in the property. So that falls into what I mentioned, what I reiterated earlier. When you see the other, it doesn't just mean we lumped categories into other. There were other other themes. They just didn't have as many responses as these that you see on the screen. As for question 6, the site has access to the Stratford Greenway and is within close proximity of Stratford Center and the waterfront. How can these and other ongoing initiatives, such as the Complete Streets work that's being done out here on Main Street, be integrated into any new development at the property? This was one question where we kind of saw an overwhelming majority of responses, which is surprising given the open-endedness of the questions, but it seems that people really preferred increased and improved accessibility. Creating better connections from the town center to the property, connecting with the greenway, or some people, a good amount of people lumped into that category asked for trolley service, believe it or not. So there's a lot of accessibility options that went into there, but definitely increased access is what people want to see. And I think that has to do with the amenities that you see in Stratford Center and the ongoing work that's being done up there. And, obviously there's the Army engine plan and things like that are happening down south. So, trying to tie in all those efforts, obviously it's an ongoing planning process for a lot of those, but, seeing that connection and that accessibility. Question 7, I thought this was one of the most important questions that was asked of the community. What should be the short-term and long-term uses for the site? In the community workshop for the short term, a lot of people expressed interest in festivals, fairs, concerts, farmers markets is also grouped into that category. So space that the community can enjoy, in the summer, but also year-round. The number 2 category where we saw a lot of responses was planning, design, and funding or fundraising. So continue the planning process in the short term. Continue the design process. Look for funding sources. As we all know, funding, there's a big question with this, and we asked it in the previous question, is financing, and how would the town secure funding sources, or if it's passed on to a nonprofit or things like that, how is the actual money, how are the dollars going to work? So people really wanted to see more of more of an emphasis on determining that before making any specific, you know, transition to the long term. And then we saw that in the community workshop there was a good amount of people. 17 people thought that a theater, a stage, or a black box should be used in the short term. As for the survey, the short term, most people expressed interest in open space, parks, recreation, those types of things, an outdoor theater or venue, so a place for things like Shakespeare in the Park or concerts or other plays and productions. It seems like the community has definitely has an interest in having some sort of production in the short term, but maybe not in an actual building or structure, but in something that's just a little bit more or less challenging to do. And then finally in the survey, festivals and fair space is mentioned up in the community workshop as well. For the long term, in the community workshop, we saw that there's a lot of varying opinions on this, and that's why it was hard to group these into categories and themes. But from what we can see, multi-use arts and entertainment space, theater, black box, stage devoted to productions, a permanent structure in a building. There was also 39 responses lumped into the long term that we could not categorize as long term or short term, and that's because people just didn't differentiate what they wanted to see. For the survey, we saw the most responses to be long-term investment would to be a theater or a black box, a multi-use facility, open space, and parks. Question 8. How do you envision the town incorporating the local arts community and other cultural or entertainment organizations in developing the site? And I want to phrase too that I think this, when we say local arts, and I mentioned this before, there was tremendous involvement from a lot of the art students in our students workshop, and also in the business and arts workshop that we put on at Connecticut Distributors. And I think a lot of people emphasized the strengths of the local arts community here in Stratford, and I think you're seeing that in some of these responses, some of these themes. Number one in the workshop was involve the existing arts and cultural entities that are here, host events that the local arts community could be a part of, involve youth and students in marketing and engagement, and that's really marketing and engagement to the arts community so that they know that they can be involved in the process and that they could have a say in what happens. As for the survey, this is similar to the question about financing in question 5. We gave closed-ended choices versus open-ended just because we knew that there was going to be a tremendous amount of responses to this, so we kind of wanted to categorize them in more general themes for you. Hosting events was number 1, followed by use of public art. Number 3, educational opportunities, and number 4 was other, with 43 responses. That was just kind of a mix of varying different responses.
This is one other question too, where you can see that the other pie is slightly smaller than the majority themes, and especially involving existing arts and cultural organizations. It's more predominant than other. And when you look at the survey, clearly people want educational and public art opportunities and events on site.
Question 9, this was the final question. It was a very general question. Do you have any feedback for us as we continue to embark on the planning process? How would you like to stay involved as the process continues? Good amount of people in both the survey and the community workshops said that they'd like to be involved via email, social media, and a website, whether it be a page on the town's website or a standalone page itself. Public meetings, forums, and events. So basically that includes similar things to the workshops that we put on back in April and early May, and also moving forward to continue those events and continue to host those meetings so that the public can provide input as the planning process continues. And then general information and updates, results of previous meetings. So nothing specific about being emailed, but just hearing things through local media or in newsletters or bulletins, but also publishing the results, such as tonight, of the meetings on the town's website. People definitely wanted to see, they wanted to be kept in the loop on what happens moving forward. So with that, I'm just going to go into some conclusions that we were able to conclude based on our research. As I previously mentioned, this was definitely a tough task to really review open-ended responses from both a community workshop setting and an online survey setting. We received, as mentioned, close to 700 responses of feedback that we had to sift through. That's a lot of data, and it's, as mentioned, it's not closed-ended questions. This is varying degrees of responses, and so it was definitely a difficult process. But I think the common themes we were able to take away from the workshops and the survey responses is that the property can be a destination for local talent and arts. I think overwhelmingly you saw that in a lot of people's responses. There's definitely that culture here within town that should be tapped into and should be continuously updated and involved throughout the process. Also, improved and increased accessibility to the site. There's a lot of ongoing things that are happening in town. I think some of you may be familiar with the Complete Streets initiatives, with the Center School initiative, and just the institutions that are here within the town center, such as Town Hall and things like that. Is how do we make that accessible to the property, and how can they tie in? Because that's they're not very far from proximity standpoint, so they definitely could be tied in. And it's something that the town should consider when planning both for this property and other endeavors down the road. And also, common themes were to host events, festivals, and concerts in the short term. Utilize the property as much as you can. Right now, it's a clean slate. It's an empty space. There's an opportunity for the town, for nonprofits, to go there and to hold festivals, hold fairs. Get people down there, get people thinking and seeing, hey, this isn't a bad idea. Look what we can do here. Imagine if we maybe mix it up a little bit and do something different down the road and not keep it one thing, for the long term. So it seems like the short term, just get things going and see where it goes from there. So that's kind of what was one of the themes. Potential opportunities presented by the site. An opportunity for the town to develop both a local and a regional attraction. We all know that the Shakespeare Theater was a regional, not only a local, but a regional attraction. It attracted people from different towns, from various states. So it's not to say that the property as a clean slate can't do that in the future. It definitely can. It also has the ability to address various community needs outlined in the workshops and online survey. It doesn't have to be a one-size-fits-all. It can be a multitude of uses at this site if that's what the town and the community want to go towards. And the town can link, as mentioned, the town can link the property to other areas via the Greenway, via Complete Streets, and other ongoing planning activities that are either ongoing or going to be proposed in the future. So with that, I'd like to thank you. I'll turn it over to Susmitha to see if she has anything to add.
I just want to add one last thing. So we did this process with a very open mind, and can you hear me now? Okay. We conducted this process keeping it very open-ended and making sure that it's entirely a listening session from the community. And our facilitators, who are also our task force members, would, I think, agree with that because they were part of every single workshop, facilitating each round table. And I believe there were more than 700 people involved in this process, even though we could only quantify 700 in terms of the community online responses and the people who attended the workshops. There were several who sent letters individually, and some sent their own passion in terms of drawings, renderings, and many other ways of communicating how they want to see this property developed. Having said that, like Patrick said, it's very difficult when you have an open-ended process and when you have so many responses to synthesize that into common themes. And we tried, Patrick tried his best to put it under bucket list so that, there's some commonality somewhere that we can all agree upon and start somewhere. I mean, it's been so long for this property that even before it was demolished, there was no consensus on way to move forward. Even now, if you look at the responses, that echoes that, that there is no more than 50% consensus on one theme. But in general, you can see that there is some common agreement that you want more increased accessibility to the site or more local arts talent being involved and host events, festivals, etc. Now, this is all what the community wants. There is another layer to this that we should look at it planning-wise. What does the market demand? If we don't want to set this for failure, we should also look at, is it realistic to do what the community demands and match it up with what the market is asking for, so that, in the long term, it is a more self-surviving and sustainable and viable option. Thank you.
Thank you, Susmita and Patrick. I'd like to adjourn just for 2 minutes while we take down the material and have the committee members take their seats on the podium, and then we'll continue with the task force comments. 2 minutes. Could everybody please take their seats? What we'd like to do is we'd like to give each committee member a minute or two to comment if they have any comments and would like to add anything. We'll start with you, Al.
Well, I pushed the button. The one thing I saw there, they kept talking about the black box. Festivals are good for the summer, but it should be something that goes year-round. So even in the winter or something, we have a building, a structure, something where events can take place all through the year. And I'm sure down the line, something will be built to that effect.
So short. I would like to say I commend you on sorting through all the data that was collected. That was a hard job because we did take a lot of information in from the public. So I wanted to commend you on that.
Also, blown away. I know from when we did the workshops that it was an iterative process. So we collected information and then flip charted them, and then you guys were left with flip charts that we wrote out. But on the results that we just saw, there were like some hard numbers attached to different buckets and categories. And I'm wondering if you could share how you arrived at those numbers.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh. So yeah, basically what we did is we took all the flip charts and online surveys. We took all the responses that we got. A response was an answer to the question. And in some cases in the community workshops, there were tallies next to specific responses because multiple people had agreed with that one response. So we made sure that we classified every response. And then what we did is we went through the data and we looked for general themes and categories. As mentioned, it was open-ended, so there was a lot of feedback that there were a lot of things that got 1 or 2 votes, 3 or 4 votes, 5 or 6 votes, but there wasn't that consensus like there were with the top 3 that we received. So when we look at things like, sorry, let me just pull up. So when we look at, for instance, question 1, just because it's the first one, and we asked about the uniqueness of the town, and we see in the workshop that the top 3 responses were history, location, and amenities. It doesn't mean that we didn't have other categories in there. And those categories will come out when we put together a plan for that basically is comprehensive and includes all the responses. You will see that. They just didn't have enough responses to really get to that threshold that the most of the public was agreeing to. And
Yeah.
when I say most, I don't mean a majority because we didn't have a majority on a lot of these things, but it seemed like those were responses were at least the top mentioned when sifting through the results. I hope that explains it.
Yeah.
It's difficult. It's very difficult because it's not,
I know it's hard to work with qualitative data and come up with quantitative results.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was the most challenging part. But as mentioned previously, is we wanted to give the community as much participation as possible, as much response. We didn't want to put them, we didn't want to put them in a box and just say, hey, look, yes, no, A, B, C, or D. Tell us how you feel and what you want to see there, and then we'll try to take it from there and generally categorize things, and that's what we ultimately did. So.
Excellent, thank you. One other question on question number 3, as kind of a qualitative finish to the question. You kind of in an offhanded way mentioned a venue, maybe outdoor spaces or stage. And I'm wondering how much actual data you got around that specific answer.
In terms of?
Outdoor spaces.
Like how many responses just to outdoors?
Like an outdoor venue.
In both the workshops and the surveys, or just in general? Or?
Either.
Well, I can say for sure that on the top 3 choices, we have open space and Parks and Rec, theater, black box, venue. The theater, black box, and venue for plays and productions was not outdoor or indoor. It was just a place for theater to happen. So we didn't classify it as outdoor or indoor. And some of those responses, venue for plays and productions, that might have been an outdoor theater or an outdoor stage. As for, that's all I can really say to that, is that.
I can add to that. I'm looking at the data here, and open space is 28. Theater, black box is another 28, which is 56. Events, festivals is another 52. So total 100, I think, would be something for that kind of use.
Okay, thank you, and thanks again for the hard work.
Great, and I'd like to thank you again. This has gone very well as a whole process, not just the report. A couple technical things, Patrick. Just because we're going over it, there's just a couple slides. I'd like to make sure that there's a uniformity with the labels. There was maybe there was 1 or 2 that didn't have the percentages on it. Just like that. So if you can sweep through and the final one gets all the technical aspects of it just uniform. And I thought it would be beneficial if we had a breakdown of the participation in numbers, just so people can refer to that in the future. Yes. Again, I want to reiterate the difficulty of switching from an open-ended conversation to a quantitative piece. And so I'm asking everybody to consider how difficult that is and the reasons why we did that. It's all been said before, but the reality is if we had presented, a fixed menu of items that people could choose, we felt we would be boxing people in. And by having the open-ended conversations, we're, fishing for the ideas that we had never thought of. And that really manifested itself in the whole process, and I'm really grateful for that. So that was part of the challenge of the setup and the output. The only other comment that I know I'll be thinking about, in the next week or so as we, go to the next meeting, is the nuances that aren't reflected in the numbers. So when we have a couple questions that have layovers between mixed-use space and black box, and I'm afraid that appears as a choice. It might not be a choice. That might actually just be a bigger pie chunk. So I think that's an important thing. There's nuances in this. We're not setting this up to be an either this or that. And there's ways to think about how to bring all of these ideas together. So I think that's another challenge that maybe the task force considers on how do we communicate the feeling of what we heard at all these workshops along with the quantitative pie chart analysis. So that's what's going to be running through my head in the next week or so, and I really appreciate all your work, both in the report and in the planning and the design of this whole process. And I'll leave my comments at that. Thank you.
I just want to add something to that. regarding the technical aspect of this, Patrick has been working very hard the past month and a half, going through every single response and trying to categorize it. And as hard as it may seem, we were working until 6:55 today. So in the last minute, I was trying to help him with the charts, and I made a mistake, and it's not completely on him. We all, I think, have to go back and sit down and look at every chart and make sure that we fix the glitches in the PowerPoint. Having said that, I think in the presentation, what we did not emphasize, and I want to emphasize right now, is that if you look at all these responses, nobody says do nothing. Nobody says build something else completely different from the options given. Those are along the lines of whatever range of options you've given. So yes, there may be combinations, like you said, some nuances, like if you had combined two sets of data together, that might be a larger piece of the pie. But in general, it's leading into the direction where the deed is asking you to do, and not something entirely different from it.
Well, first I'd like to thank Susmitha and Patrick, who did a lot of work, and I know how much work was involved. I'd also like to thank Mary Dean and Karen Spartini for setting up all these meetings and giving their time for evenings and everything, setting up. So thank you very much, ladies. And I'd like to thank the committee members for giving of their time and really taking this whole process seriously. And of course, last but not least, Mayor Hoydick for setting this all up. I appreciate it. Mayor, if you would like to come up and speak, we can finish the comments from the committee, or you can come right now.
So, outside of thanking everybody that you just did, your involvement has been so critical to the process. And yes, we have excellent facilitators who helped organize this with Patrick and Susmitha and Mary and Karen. And their professionalism and the standards that you have all set is so affirming to what we are trying to achieve here. And that was to reach community consensus, maybe, to have community input and hear it, and then decide what we're going to do going forward. The things we learned from the past is that inaction has been a detriment to us. Because we couldn't agree, because we couldn't come together, because we couldn't compromise and collaborate, we lost an asset. And that's something that I don't think we want to do any further. And it's so important that we've had this openness in conversation. We can disagree, and even though many of us are working parallel or together to do certain things, and we can still disagree about it, we will have a better outcome because at least we are doing. And I'm so proud of us for doing this. And when the theater burned in January, and we didn't know what the cause was, and then we found out what the cause was, and it I think it settled us, because there was all the finger pointing and different projections about what we should have done and what we could have done if we had done it differently. But we have a second chance. And I'm really excited about this second chance. And I'm excited that we're working with Stratford Forward and the Stratford's Arts and Cultural Festival to do something on the grounds. I'm glad the grounds are accessible. And really, when you look at all the data, it doesn't surprise me that we all have different opinions, because we've always had different opinions about what to do with this property. So we just need to, I think, work a little bit closer together. And I think we'll do this. I'm really confident that between our boards and commissions that are talented in this area, between all that you have offered and how you'll continue to help us, I think we will come to some consensus, and we will do things there. And when I say things, it's because of that data. There can be multiple things. It is a beautiful property. It is on the river. We've had the Harbor and Waterfront Management weighing in on what should happen. We've had the Greenway Committee. We've just had so much participation almost, between 800 and 900 participants. It's more we were talking about today than the plan of conservation development, which is critical to the town of Stratford in planning our future. So I know it's been hard, because let me say this, it hasn't been easy because you want to be inclusive, but you've done a really phenomenal job, and I can't thank you enough for all that you've done for us and for the town, so thank you.
I have to follow that now. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, well, again, thank you for compiling all this data. I know there was pages upon pages at all these workshops that had to be put together, but I'm sure we can find a balance of all these things. The opportunity is there for something, short-term, long-term things, but we can find something that there's a balance. Combination of things like was said. Public and private funding, as we found out, is probably going to be very key to being successful to this and sustaining it. Community involvement is also going to be key too, so thank you all for coming tonight and continue to come along too. We'll find something that can work there, and as Susmita mentioned, it has to also be what the market will allow too. That was very good of you to say that, so we'll find something.
Yes, I guess I want to thank everyone for thanking everyone. Thank you. Kind of a lot of thank yous going on. A lot of I like the back slapping aspect of everything here. It's very good. No, it's been a great process. I thank everybody, the thanks for coming out and contributing. I think this pretty much confirms that everyone pretty much wants theater and community activity, and I think we all do want the same thing. So it looks like we could all move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ed said it well, so I won't labor it. You're welcome. I will say, as a resident, it was incredibly rewarding to sit with the community and have these discussions and be part of what felt really exciting and important in our time here. I did find it interesting that our ability to kind of be together and influence and negotiate each other made the workshop feedback different than the survey in some ways. And I felt that as a facilitator that, Tom would say something and then, well, you didn't say anything because you were facilitating, but the next person would say, oh yeah, that's a great idea. And then we would build on each other. And it was, to the mayor's point, really special and organic. I will say to that too, that I think when I'm thinking of the resident perspective and someone not as involved as we were, and I see that the other is a higher percentage than the other pieces of the pie, I just wonder if the raw data is coming out at the same time as the PowerPoint so that they can refer. It didn't trigger me as much when it's 15-30%, but when it's 52-54, I'm craving to understand. I can intellectualize the analysis and how it works with the buckets, but I wonder if the two come out together. Is that possible, or is that planned?
Yeah, I think the idea is to distribute the raw data, which would be basically the flip charts and also the online survey information that we were able to obtain via an Excel spreadsheet. That's something that we can make available, and you will see after reviewing that there is it would be hard to generalize every response, but as mentioned, we did the best way we could. But yeah, we don't have any issue with providing the raw data.
Yeah, I just wondered about the timeliness of it. It might help if people are curious.
There is some personal information in there in terms of addresses, emails, and all that have to be redacted. So that might take a little bit more time if you really need it compared to the PowerPoint, which we're focusing on right now. Because like Patrick said, involves all the other options in the questions, in the survey, or other things mentioned at the tables, plus individual responses written or emailed. Those that were heard generally, which were not part of the options, So it's a range of things, and then it'll take a little bit more time. I wouldn't promise it in the next 2 days. I can promise the PowerPoint in the next 2 days.
And I am working on a final plan that will break down the information a little bit further. So what we saw tonight was just the top 3 options, but we will go down in the list, and you'll see basically a report that summarizes pretty much all the responses.
Yeah, and I'm thinking maybe the best approach is to have under every question some unique responses being put, like these are the types of unique responses for each question as examples in the report. So you understand, get an idea about what the uniqueness is and why it is not related to any of those buckets that Patrick summarized.
And one more thing, I think to echo Sib and Tom, I think some sort of, I don't know if it's a phrase somewhere in there where we share the kind of public consumption version of what we're talking about. It doesn't need to be this quadrant, this or this. It can be a version of all of those things. I think that there's a beautiful takeaway there versus someone at home on their laptop thinking, oh, we have to pick a black box or a. I think that could be strong.
Well, I will thank you all anyway, even though it's been addressed. But no, it's, I wanted to say it's been an honor to be a part of this process. A lifelong resident of Stratford, and I told this story in our breakout session that I still remember back to elementary school when we took field trips and we walked to the theater to see shows, and so it's very special to not only myself but all the people here, obviously. But so it has been a real honor to be a part of this. I thank you all, and I thank you for what you've done. But I did have a couple of questions that came up during the sessions, and you may have addressed it, but I wanted to just ask again. After you've compiled all the information, when the next step, will you come out with a list of options? People wanted to know how that next step would go, and will they be able to be a part of that process as well, or will you just take the data and move forward? So that was one question.
I think this is a continuous process. This doesn't end here. Okay. After this, in 2 weeks, we'll have that public comment meeting where public can come and testify on their feedback. And then it's also going to be presented before RDA. And then whatever is the takeaway message from the committee and RDA will be presented before council. Mary, correct me if I'm wrong. And then after that, we also want to make sure that whatever's the next step, I'm, as a planner, more leaning towards a market analysis, but maybe I'm wrong, and the council could come up with a better option, or we're also trying to parallelly talk to state organizations, so if somebody advises us differently, maybe it'll be a different approach. Whatever may be the approach, there will be always room for community input in those processes. The way the whole setup is nowadays is that nothing happens without community input.
Okay. Also, you touched on it earlier and just now, but how will you gauge with the market demands? Like, you mentioned the market analysis, so how will you go about gauging that?
Well, first of all, the challenges that we're working under are budget, and we need some budget to work towards the market study, go through hire a professional consultant through an RFP, RFQ process, and then take the process from there. So that's what in my past experiences, that's how we've been doing planning studies, market analysis studies, and I'm assuming that will be the process if a market analysis has to be conducted. It should be like, it should be a town, so fair hiring, policy, whatever is the RFP, whether it's an RFP, procurement policy, or RFQ, whatever is the process there.
So then whatever you come up with there, you'll match up with what the consensus is?
Typically, we develop a scope based on what the community input has been from this process, and then ask the consultant to work based on that scope of work and with the budget that is assigned to them.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
One last round of thanks as the final committee member who was not able to participate in the community process. I want to thank all of you on the committee who did participate very actively in all of these meetings, as well as the technical staff. It was evident to me while I was not in the community meetings that there was a very different tone of response from the community responses than there was from the survey responses. And I think that's what some of you have remarked to in terms of the dialogue becomes more rich as there's a back and forth with people. And that was heartening to see. Again, not having been in these meetings, but just seeing the responses, I did have a few questions, and just wanted to make sure that when we are coming up with our takeaways from the process, that we don't get too caught up with the sort of arbitrary distinctions that we're making within categories and don't sort of see the whole versus the individual parts. I think it's the sum of those parts that's telling us what is it that the community really wants. You know, Tom and others have spoken to that. I think many of these categories are very similar. And while it looks like on the pie chart that you've got 3 or 4 relatively equal categories, 2 are very similar and 1 is different. And it's important to take that into account in terms of how this is being presented and consumed by others. Otherwise, I think there's sort of a false impression of, you know, these are all equal categories, when in fact, if you step back, I don't think they are. And also, I was heartened to hear that some of the more significant or noteworthy responses that fell into the other bucket are going to be called out, because I'm sure you had you know, unique responses from some community members who have a lot of experience in certain areas that might not be generally reflected in comments, but is important for all of us to, you know, be aware of and informed by. So I think it's great that you're going to sort of highlight some of those things that add value to the overall process. I think those were my sort of most significant takeaways.
And I'd just like to speak to that, and thank you for that. When we put together the data and the categories, we tried our best not to lump things too general into certain categories. And that's why when, as you mentioned, when we break down the other categories, there's going to be distinct responses, some very good responses that just didn't fit into those categories. But you know, as mentioned previously throughout the meeting tonight, is we just wanted to give you that kind of general overview, but knowing that there is definitely you know, room for interpretation on some of the categories where they could be either combined or maybe even potentially split out in some instances. So,
yeah, I found a lot more commonality than I expected, actually, in terms of the community reaction to. You know, I think there is a desire for something along the lines of what historically has been there, but has you know, more varied uses available to it. So that was good to see.
Yes, I also want to conclude by saying that there were some meetings in my past where it didn't go quite well. There were angry residents who stormed out of meetings, threw the papers, screamed at town staff. Nothing like that happened, even though we had 700 people come, which shows that people, even the ground rules worked, and people are actually there to offer their opinions and more than express their anger. And it was, it has to be noted that it was very nice to see that kind of involvement where your anger comes behind, but what you want to say, what you want to express is more important. And that is also reflected in the online survey responses. If you see the number of people that took the survey is also larger than even a hazard mitigation plan survey that the region conducts. So there's a lot of passion, involvement, interest in this. At the same time, I think it was also a very respectful exchange of ideas that happened.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'm not going to say the same two words again, but I do want to make sure everybody's had an opportunity to get their comments in. Anybody have any final thoughts that they want to lay off? Otherwise, I'll move the agenda forward. So with that, we're just talking about the next steps. And I'll just make one small clarification. Curtis, your question to Mrs. Smitha and her response is, you know, a process that is going to begin after the task force work finishes. So the task force itself is going to be responsible for delivering this report, the background information, and you know, kind of a bundle of information, and presented formally to the mayor. That is going to be the end of the task force responsibilities, and then the process of redeveloping the Shakespeare property will be moving forward, you know, through all its various and appropriate pathways. And there's always going to be, I believe there's always going to be an enormous space for public comment and public participation. So, you know, again, that's going to be the way it goes. Now, for basically, just to clarify, we've asked for a couple little minor changes, technical changes on the PowerPoint. That's going to be done. So Smith has given us a promise for 2 days. You know, that at that point, that PowerPoint is going to be publicly accessible on the town's website. That is going to be the main point of distribution for that, so everybody can have that and take a look at it, go through it, put their thought into it, and on July 9, there will be another meeting here in which it will be almost expressly for the final thoughts of the task members, but primarily about the public input and its, you know, final voice into this whole process. That's July 9. It'll be on all the town websites about, you know, finding the time and all that. Yeah, so then at that point, the July 9th is likely to be our final meeting, and we'll be working together via email in the meantime. The report will be emailed to all the task force members, so we have it, and I expect us to be kind of chiming in the 2 weeks, you know, with commentary, so that we are, in fact, a basically unified voice behind that final package that goes to the mayor's office. And I think that covers it for our meeting.
I don't know if you said this, I'm sorry if I'm belaboring it, but it was so helpful to hear Patrick's explanation of the other, and I don't feel like it's captured in just the visual. So I'm just thinking of a resident at home looking at that. So if there's a way to add that.
Elaborate on other, okay. This was a PowerPoint slide deck, so we tried to keep it short, under 20 minutes. So maybe in the report, we can, actually, in 2 days, we would just tighten this PowerPoint and give it so public can access it and they have enough time to review it. But then we can add additional slides to it and give it in 2 weeks.
Terrific. Tony?
I think that's it, and I guess I should make a motion to adjourn. Or entertain a motion to adjourn. Sib? Patty, second? All in favor? Adjourned.